But I want to welcome back.
Thank you.
I'm Jeff from California, where it's nice and sunny, I hope. And, here, where spring is just beginning, we are very privileged to have you join us once again and to be able to talk in depth about some of the deeper teachings of the Buddha. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, Thanissaro Bhikkhu has visited us a number of times before to talk about chapters related to On the Path, one of his important books about the Eightfold Path. He is a member of the Forest Monk tradition and abbot of Metaforest Monastery, which is between San Diego and Los Angeles. Without too much further introduction, since most of us already are familiar, we want to welcome you and looking forward to your teachings here tonight. So thank you very much for coming again.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Let's start with some meditation. If you already have a method you like, go ahead and meditate that way. I'm going to try the breath meditation method. I'm going to be introducing right now. Okay, we can follow that too. Start with thoughts of goodwill. Goodwill is a wish for true happiness. It's part of our motivation for being here. We're looking for a happiness that doesn't harm anyone. So we want to have goodwill for everybody. Because if our happiness harms someone else, it's not going to last. We're not going to feel comfortable about it. So this is one of the reasons why we practice, is we want our goodwill to be universal. So start with thoughts of goodwill for yourself. Tell yourself, may I be happy? May I be truly happy? May I understand the causes for true happiness and be willing and able to act on it? And then spread that same thought to others. Start with people who are close to your heart, family, your very close friends. May they find true happiness too. Then spread that thought out in ever widening circles, people you know well and like. To people you like, even though you don't know them so well. To people you're more neutral about. And to people you don't like. Remind yourself that the world would be a much better place if everyone could have true happiness within. And you don't want your goodwill to be limited by your likes and dislikes. Spread thoughts of goodwill to people you don't even know. And not just people, living beings of all kinds, east, west, north, south, above and below, out to infinity. May we all find true happiness in our hearts. Now bring your attention to the breath. Take a couple of good, long, deep in and out breaths. Notice where you feel the breathing process in the body. It's that flow of energy in the body that the Buddha is talking about when he talks about breath. Focus your attention where it's clearest, and then ask yourself if long breathing is comfortable. If it is, keep it up. If not, you can change. Try shorter breathing, faster breathing, slower breathing, more shallow, heavier, lighter. experiment for a while to see what rhythm and texture of breathing feels best for the body right now. When you find a rhythm that feels good, stick with it until it doesn't feel so good anymore. And you can change again. Try to be on top of the needs of the body in the present moment. If your mind wanders off, you don't have to follow the thoughts. Just drop them and you'll be back at the breath. If they wander off again, drop them again. Each time you come back to the breath, reward yourself with a breath that feels especially good deep down inside. That way the mind will be more and more inclined to want to come back to the breath. As for any pains in the body, you don't have to pay any attention to them right now. Focus on the areas of the body that you can make comfortable by the way you breathe. Now, as the breath gets comfortable, there is a tendency to drop the breath and focus on the comfort, in which case you lose the focus of your concentration. So to counteract that tendency, the Buddha recommends that the next step is to be aware of the whole body as you breathe in, the whole body as you breathe out. And a good way to build up to that whole body awareness is to go through the body first, section by section, to familiarize yourself with how the breathing feels in each part of the body. So start down around the navel. Locate that part of the body in your awareness and watch it for a while as you breathe in, breathe out, to see what rhythm of breathing feels good there. If you feel any tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax. So that no new tension builds up as you breathe in, and you don't hold on to any tension as you breathe out. Now move your attention up to the solar plexus and follow the same 3 steps there. In other words, 1, locate that part of the body in your awareness. It's right in front of the stomach. 2, watch it for a while as you breathe in, breathe out, to see what rhythm of breathing feels good there. And then 3, if there's any sense of tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax. Now move your attention up to the middle of the chest and follow the same steps there. Now move your attention up to the base of the throat and follow the same steps there. Now bring attention to the middle of the head. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy coming in not only through the nose, but also the eyes and the ears. In from the back of the head, down from the top of the head, going deep into the brain. Then as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from the head in all directions, working through any patterns of tension you may have in the jaws, the forehead, the back of the neck. And gently dissolving those patterns of tension away. focus your attention to the back of the neck. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy coming from the back into that spot. And then going down to the neck, the shoulders, the arms, the wrists, the hands, out to the tips of the fingers. And then as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. And as you get more sensitive to these parts of the body, if you notice that you're holding more tension in one side than the other, allow that side to relax to bring things into balance. And then see if you can keep it relaxed all the way through the in-breath, all the way through the out. Now, keeping your attention focused to the back of the neck. This time as you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there, and then going down both sides of the spine and down to the tailbone. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from the entire back into the air. And here again, if you notice that you're holding more tension in one side of the back than the other, allow that side to relax to bring things into balance. Then see if you can keep it relaxed all the way through the in-breath, all the way through the out. Now move your attention down to the tailbone. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there and then going down to the hips, the legs, the feet, out to the tips of the toes. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. And here again, if you see there's more tension in one leg than the other, or one foot than the other, allow that side to relax. And keep it relaxed as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Now, it completes one cycle in the survey of the body. If you're meditating on your own, you could go through the body as many times as you like. For the time being, try to choose one spot that feels most congenial. Allow your attention to center there. And then from that spot to spread out and fill the whole body. So you're the whole body breathing in, the whole body breathing out. Be especially diligent in keeping your range of awareness filling the whole body, because it will have a tendency to shrink, especially on the out breath. So each time you breathe in, whole body. Each time you breathe out, whole body. Allow the breath to find whatever rhythm feels best. If you find yourself blurring out, go back to the survey of the body. But otherwise, try to maintain a sense of centered but broad awareness. It's healing for the body, healing for the mind. Because it's stilling it all around. It's a good foundation for insight to arise. But for the time being, don't worry about the insights. Just try to make sure that this foundation is strong. Okay, I invite you to continue meditating while I give the talk. We'll have time for questions and answers afterwards. We've been reading Majjhima 137, the Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta. And it covers a lot of topics, but in particular, it has a lot to say about equanimity. So tonight, I'd like to focus my comments on equanimity, what the sutta has to say, placed in the context of what other suttas have to say about the topic, so you can get an all-around view of it. The Buddha saw that feelings and emotions can be developed. You're not just stuck willy-nilly with whatever arises, pleasure, pain, equanimity, whatever. This means that issues of karma and the Four Noble Truths get involved. You have to think of the results of developing a particular feeling. This is especially true with equanimity, because as the Buddha said, sometimes it is to be developed and sometimes it's not to be developed. The kind that's not to be developed is equanimity that leads to laziness or defeatism. A common example you see in Buddhist circles is the idea that all things are inconstant and impermanent. It's the only way to find a measure of happiness is to stop trying to find something that doesn't change, accept the fact of impermanence, and try to content yourself with that. Actually, though, there is nirvana, which doesn't change. And so if you content yourself with just accepting impermanence, you're going to be missing out on a big chance to find something of real value. The kind of equanimity that is to be developed is equanimity that allows you to accept setbacks and not get knocked out by them in your quest to find that ultimate happiness. So instead of using equanimity to lower your standards for happiness, use it as part of a program to raise your standards for happiness. You might call this the equanimity of a winner rather than the equanimity of a loser. The Forest Ajahns made this distinction in different ways. Ajahn Fuang, my own teacher, would talk about small-hearted equanimity versus big-hearted equanimity. Small-hearted is when you get depressed and defeatist. Say there's nothing good in the world, so I just might as well learn how to be equanimous about it all. Don't have any big expectations. That's a recipe for depression. Big-hearted equanimity is when you found a true happiness. You look at the rest of the world and you realize that you're not feeding on the rest of the world anymore. And so you can be equanimous about the ups and downs of what's happening around you. And John Cha has a really nice story about equanimity. A storm went through his monastery one time. And the next day he went through the monastery to check up on the damage. He came to one hut where half the roof had been blown off by the winds of the storm. And he noticed that the monk was sitting inside the hut, hadn't done anything about the roof. And so he asked him, why aren't you fixing the roof? And the monk said, well, I'm practicing equanimity. And John Cha said, this is the equanimity of a water buffalo. It's not the equanimity of a human being. Fix the roof. In other words, don't make equanimity an excuse to be lazy. Then we look at the Buddhist teachings on equanimity, we find there are two ways of analyzing them. One in terms of the contact of other qualities that are taught along with equanimity. The other is in terms of levels of equanimity. In terms of the context, equanimity is never taught alone because, as I said, there are times when it is skillful and when it is not. And usually when it's skillful, it has to be accompanied by other good qualities of mind. The two main contexts in which you find it are in the Brahma Viharas, or the sublime attitudes of goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. The other main context is in the Bojjhangas, or the factors for awakening, where you have mindfulness, analysis of qualities, persistence, rapture, calm, concentration, and then equanimity. In each case, it's put at the end of the list, which is sometimes read as meaning that it's higher than the others, so that it's found by overcoming the others. But that's not the case. It has to be mixed with the other qualities in the list at the right time and the right place in order to be skillful. We'll notice that when we look at these two different contexts in terms of the factors for awakening, which are basically about the practice of mindfulness and concentration, how right mindfulness leads to a right concentration. We find that equanimity is selective. We apply it to some things at some times. Whereas in the context of the Brahma Viharas, it's more universal. You have to apply it, be able to apply it in all contexts, again, when necessary. In the context of practicing mindfulness and concentration, you find that the unskillful times have to do with when the mind is sluggish. There's a sutta in the Sangha Nikaya 4653 which compares meditation to starting a fire. And there are times, it says, when the fire is about to go out. And so those are the times when you don't put more ashes or water on the fire, that you actually try to put more fuel into the fire. The analogy here being that you try to use the more active factors for awakening, such as analysis of qualities, persistence, rapture, at times like that. You don't try to develop calm, concentration, and equanimity. There are other times, though, when the mind has too much energy, and that's when equanimity, calm, and concentration are called for. And you don't try to develop the other more active qualities. There's another sutta, Apangutta 3.103, which illustrates this principle with the image of a goldsmith. As it says, the goldsmith has basically 3 activities that he has to do with gold. 1 is he puts it in the fire. 2, he takes it out, blows on it to cool it off. And then 3, he looks at it to see what needs to be done further. Putting it in the fire stands for right effort. Taking it out, blowing on it stands for concentration. And then simply looking at it stands for equanimity. Now he says, if you do just one of these things at a time, for instance, if you do just right effort or just concentration or just equanimity, there are going to be problems. If you do just effort, it develops restlessness in the mind. If you focus simply on concentration, the mind gets lazy. And if you focus on equanimity, nothing happens. Concentration doesn't get developed. So the role of equanimity here is not that you just watch things and accept them. You're looking at things so that you can figure out what to do with them. This is illustrated in another sutta where the Buddha is talking to his son about meditation. And before he even teaches him the basic meditation techniques, he tells him, you've got to make your mind like earth. Disgusting things are thrown on earth, but the earth doesn't get disgusted by them. Make it like water, wind, fire. Water is used to wash away disgusting things. Wind blows disgusting things around. Fire can burn disgusting things, but they don't get upset by these things. This is a quality of mind that you want to bring to the meditation so that you can observe what's going on in the mind and make a fair judgment of what needs to be done. So the role of equanimity here is not indifference. It's not a case that you don't care about what's going on or you're not going to try to do anything about what's going on. It's because you do care and you're trying to figure out exactly what would be the best thing to do. So you have to be able to look at things with a fair and just, emotionally neutral mode so that you can figure out what needs to be done best. There's another reason why equanimity is selective in the practice of concentration and mindfulness, and that's because, as the Buddha points out, there are 2 kinds of causes for suffering in the mind. There are the causes that will go away when you simply look at them with equanimity. There are others, though, that will not go away. In other words, you look at them and they look right back. They don't get this embarrassed by the fact that you're looking at them. In a case like that, you have to use that, as the Buddha says, you have to exert a fabrication, which means that you have to work with the way you breathe, work with the way you talk to yourself about what's going on, work with the perceptions you're holding in mind so that you learn how to overcome that particular defilement. We might say that equanimity in the practice of concentration and mindfulness is the equanimity of a craftsman or a soldier. In other words, in face of setbacks, you don't let them get you down. You continue to look for ways to come out victorious. The idea of a craftsman being paired with a soldier may sound strange, but if you've ever read Benvenuto Cellini's autobiography, it makes it sound like being a good craftsman is like doing battle. You may know of his statue of Perseus holding the head of Medusa. It was a very difficult statue to cast. And he talks in very dramatic ways about how he defeated his helpers who were discouraged by the fact that this was not going to be able to be done. Another great incident in European history is when the story about Talleyrand and Napoleon. Now, Talleyrand was Napoleon's main diplomat. And Napoleon used him, but never really trusted him. They said, oh, but Talleyrand was too independent. There was one time when he was convinced that Talleyrand was actually plotting to do him in. And so he spent one evening yelling at him in front of all the other ministers. And Talleyrand, as he reported it later, said he showed no emotion at all, which of course got Napoleon even more frustrated. Here it is, the most powerful man in Europe yelling at you. and you're not showing any emotion. But Thanissaro was saying he was trying to figure out, he was convinced he was probably going to go to jail. And if he did have to go to jail, he was trying to figure out what he was going to be able to do to get out. So instead of getting upset about what was happening, he was able to keep equanimous and figure out some way of getting past it. Well, as it turned out, Napoleon was so unnerved by Tannissau's sang-froid, they didn't do anything. That's a case of using equanimity so that you're not bowled over by setbacks. And you can keep your mind calm and then figure out a way to get around it. So that's an image for equanimity in the practice of mindfulness and concentration. As I said, it's the equanimity of a craftsman or a soldier. In the context of the Brahma Viharas, or the sublime attitudes, this is where equanimity has to be universal. You have to be able to apply it to anyone at any time, even those that you really like or really hate. It acts as a reality check on the other Brahma Viharas. You may notice goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy are expressed in terms of saying, may this happen, may all beings be happy, may all beings be freed from their suffering. May those who are happy not lose their happiness. May, it's a wish. Whereas the expression for equanimity is all beings are the owners of their actions. It's a statement of fact. So it's a reality check. And it's there so that you don't waste energy on areas that can't be helped. And so you can be helpful in upsetting situations and fair to others, regardless of your likes or dislikes for those people. You might say that this is the equanimity of a doctor. You don't get upset about the patient's condition, especially when it doesn't respond to treatment. You focus on what can be done. You treat the patient regardless of whether you like that person or not. You're fair and equanimous as a basis for strengthening your compassion and goodwill for the person. So those are two cases of equanimity in context of the factors for awakening and in the context of the Brahma Viharas. We see that has to be combined with other skillful qualities in order to be skillful itself. If you just approach, say a doctor were totally equanimous about things, you wouldn't trust that doctor to treat you well. You want the doctor to have some compassion for you as well. If a soldier were totally equanimous about things, we would just see the enemy come and just be equanimous about the fact that this place is being overrun. Again, it would be a soldier you couldn't trust. So in cases like this, you want to develop equanimity in combination with other factors to make sure that it balances them out. And the other factors and equanimity strengthen one another. Now, in terms of the levels of equanimity, the canon contains 3 lists. 2 of them are here in the Silayatana and the Thanissaro. The first one is the distinction about house-based equanimity and renunciation-based equanimity. Now remember, if you read the passage, house-based equanimity is the one of what they say, a run-of-the-mill person who has not overcome limitations and the results of action and is blind to danger. What this means, it's hard to tell from the canon. The canon doesn't explain. The commentary to that passage also is not all that helpful. Apparently, what it refers to is a passage in the Anguttara Nikaya, when the Buddha talks about meeting your past bad karma with a limited or an unlimited mind. If you have a limited mind, then the effects of karma will have a big effect on you. The Buddha's analogy is of a cup of water. If you put a large salt crystal into the cup of water, you can't drink the water because it's too salty. But if you make your mind unlimited, and you can, then you're not affected by the results of past bad karma. The analogy here is of a large river of clean water. You throw that same salt crystal into the river, and you can drink the water because there's so much more water than there is salt. In the same way, the Buddha says, if you develop the Brahma Viharas, you're making your mind unlimited. If you learn how to develop virtue and discernment, if you train your mind so that it's not overcome by pleasure, not overcome by pain, then whatever past bad karma you have does not place limitations on you. As for being blind to the danger, I mean, you would probably be blind to the danger of sensuality. In other words, when the Buddha is talking about house-based equanimity, it's just that there are certain things you're equanimous about, but the equanimity doesn't extend to other things. It's not a across-the-board kind of attitude. You're equanimous about things you don't care about. Things you care about, you have either a sense of pleasure around them or a sense of disappointment, a sense of distress. So the equanimity is limited to the object that is focused on, the object that it's related to. As soon as the object changes, the equanimity is gone. That's house-based equanimity. Now, renunciation-based equanimity is seeing that all sense objects, both now and before, are in constant, stressful, subject to change. This equanimity, the Buddha says, goes beyond the object because you see as a general principle that everything is subject to change, and you got equanimous about that fact. This is said to be a result of insight practice. The other list that's put in 173, and it's good to notice that there are two separate lists here. Because the Buddha talks on equanimity based on multiplicity and equanimity based on singleness. So equanimity based on multiplicity is equanimity for your everyday experiences, whether you have insight into them or not. And even the experience of the four jhanas, this too counts as based on multiplicity. Because when you're in the four jhanas, you can still have an experience of the world outside. You're not focusing on it, but there are sounds, there are smells, there are tastes. Your eyes are open, there are things you see. But you're totally equanimous to them. But still, that you're able to experience the senses. You have to be equanimous to them in order to remain focused on your topic. That's equanimity based on multiplicity. Now, equanimity based on singleness has to do with the formless states. The infinitude of space as an object of meditation, the infinitude of consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception or non-perception. Now, the Buddha says that if you're purely in those states, you will not have an experience. You don't hear sounds, you don't sense the body. You're cut off from your sensory experiences at that point. In which case the mind is totally single, and your equanimity is totally single. But that kind of equanimity is not the goal. It simply is a concentration state. The Buddha says you go beyond that to what he says equanimity leads to non-fashioning, ataya. I can never say this word properly. Which means that you're not creating a sense of self around those attainments. So that's when you're applying insight to your meditation attainments, whether they're the jhanas or the formless states. So you're moving beyond equanimity to something that's higher, because it's beginning to involve discernment, and that discernment is the kind of discernment that can take you to the threshold of awakening. Now there's another analysis which comes in the Sanyutta 36. Right, the number of the sutta, Sanyutta 36 something. And it talks about there are 3 levels of equanimity. Start with everyday equanimity, which is around pleasing objects of the senses, and going all the way up through the first 3 jhanas. And then there's equanimity, which is said to be, but this is called equanimity of the flesh. Then there's equanimity not of the flesh, which is the equanimity of the 4th jhana. And the mind is settled in and totally equanimous about its object. There's a sense of sort of neutrality in the body, but it's a pleasant neutrality. Everything gets so refined in the body that even the breath in and out breathing stops. You still have a sense of the breath energy in the body, but the in and out breathing is gone. And then there's what the Buddha calls equanimity, which is more not of the flesh than not of the flesh. And that's the equanimity that comes after awakening, after your mind has been totally freed from passion, aversion, and delusion. Then when you reflect on it, you could either feel feelings of rapture, feelings of pleasure, or feelings of equanimity. This is a side effect of awakening. So that's another way of analyzing levels of equanimity. So you've got 3 in all, the two analyses of levels of equanimity that we have in Module 137, and the one that comes in the Sanyutta 36. Now there's some practical issues that are raised based on these lists. One is the equanimity of meditation. Mindful equanimity is the lowest of the 3. Sometimes you hear about mindfulness practice getting you to a state of equanimity, which is what it's all about, but it's not what it's all about. It's the lowest level of equanimity you can have. Even some of the early levels of jhana count as just everyday equanimity. So the lesson here is that you don't try to clone the equanimity of awakening. We all hear that a person who's awakened can be equanimous about things. And so we just say, well, I'll just make myself equanimous. But that's just, house-based equanimity based on multiplicity, and equanimity of the flesh. You've got to go beyond that. The second point is that you have to use ordinary equanimity in order to reach the first levels of jhana, even to get up to the fourth before equanimity gets established. This relates to that image of making the mind like earth, water, wind, and fire. In other words, you have to train the mind so that it can be non-reactive enough so that you can get the mind to settle down. As for equanimity in daily life, this is basically an application of the sublime attitudes. Its purpose is to let go of what cannot be changed, or whose change cannot be stopped. So you can focus energy on what can be changed, or change can be stopped. In other words, the question of your priorities is where you want to focus your energy. You accept the duties that get in the way of what you want. In other words, as you practice as a layperson, you have to realize, okay, there's certain duties you've got that are going to get in the way of your practice. You have to be equanimous about those. You have to learn how to talk to yourself in ways that don't get you upset. One of the issues that the Thai forest Ajahns are constantly meeting up with is people say, well, I don't have time to meditate. And they say, well, do you have time to breathe? And they say, well, yes. Okay, then you have time to sort of be with your breath as much as you can. So it may not be all the time, but you learn to look for the opportunities that you have and learn how not to get upset by the times when you find it impossible or difficult to focus on the breath. Just say, okay, I'm learning how to develop other qualities in my meditation, other perfections, and to learn how to have a balanced attitude toward your practice in daily life. And that way it will progress a lot more easily. Some people say, if you're going to be totally non-attached, how can you live in this world? We're not saying to be totally non-attached. It's more of an issue of learning how not to feed, even when there is emotional attachment and affection. I mean, even the monks are expected to have affection for one another. The senior monks are supposed to treat the junior monks as their children, and have the same attitude towards them that the father would have to a son. So the Buddha doesn't say that you shouldn't have affection for one another. It's basically saying using your discernment and seeing how to have affection for someone, but not make your happiness dependent on that particular relationship. It's difficult, but that's the skill that needs to be developed as part of the practice. And in general, using equanimity in daily life, it involves discernment. You have to see which issues are worth focusing on and which issues are not worth focusing on. It's a matter of priorities. You might think of the analogy of a chess game. You have to be willing to lose some of your pieces if you want to come out winning. Now, in both cases, both in meditation and in daily life, we're talking about the equanimity of a winner, as I said, not the equanimity of a loser. Someone who knows how to develop equanimity in order to get to the goal. As for the goal itself, equanimity, as I said, is needed to get there, but it's not the same thing. And this is another point of confusion. Sometimes you hear it said that the purpose of the practice is to be equanimous in all situations. That's not the purpose, it's part of the path. Majjhima 106 explains why equanimity is not the goal. There can still be a sense of attachment clinging to the equanimity, even on very subtle levels of concentration. And so you need to, in order to develop discernment, in order to get rid of that last vestige of clinging and feeding, sort of emotional feeding on the equanimity. As for the equanimity that's associated with attainment itself, remember that nirvana is the foremost happiness. It's the place where the Buddha says it's the foremost equanimity. When that is secure, you can look back on the mind with equanimity, noting that there's no more that needs to be done. And as you look at everything else, you realize that you no longer have to feed on these things. So no matter how they change, it's not going to affect you. It's like looking at reports of the weather on Mars. It's not going to affect you. So if there's a horrible sandstorm or whatever, okay, you just watch it, you know about it. But it doesn't affect you because it's not something that you're feeding on anymore. Because you found something better. something where you don't need to feed, but it's a happiness that's there. It's constant. So those are some of the issues around equanimity, understanding how it fits in with the practice of mindfulness and concentration in the context of the practice for awakening, how it fits in together with the practice of developing goodwill, compassion, and empathetic joy in the sublime attitudes, and the different levels that we have, focusing on the fact that it is possible to develop everyday equanimity, and it is part of the path. In order to get the mind to settle down, you have to learn how to develop this kind of equanimity. But then it will develop to higher and higher levels that are more and more solid, which will be more and more conducive to getting to the goal. So those are some thoughts about equanimity. I was wondering if you had any questions about that topic or anything else related to the sutta.
Yes, we can open up the room for people to ask questions. Either you can type them in the chat or you can signal us so that we can unmute you. As people are thinking about what questions you might have, I've prepared a few. So maybe
I have a story to tell.
Please go ahead.
I know. Have I told the story about my friend and her novel about China?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
I have a friend from school. He used to write novels set in China. And one of them, and she was a professor at university, which meant that once a novel would come out, she was invited around to the different alumni clubs to read passages from the novels. And so she would try to, select a short sequence from the novel that was self-contained. And in one of her novels, she came up with the story of a woman whose mother had died. And the father originally had promised not to remarry, but within 6 months, he had found a courtesan, married her, brought her home. And the young girl was really upset about this, but the courtesan tried to do her best to be a good mother. And one evening, they're playing chess. And she's telling her young stepdaughter that, if you want to be happy in life, you have to decide that there's one thing you want more than anything else. And you're willing to sacrifice everything else for that one thing. And the young daughter is sort of half listening, but half not listening. But she's beginning to notice that her stepmother is a very sloppy chess player, losing pieces all over the board. And so she gets more aggressive. And as she gets aggressive, she falls into the mother's trap. The mother checkmates. And of course, the way the stepmother is playing chess illustrates the point that she's trying to make, which is you got to be willing to sacrifice your chess pieces in order to win. Now, my friend said she took that and read it at different alumni clubs. And after the third club, she decided she had to find another passage out of that novel. Nobody liked the message. Everybody wants to win at chess and keep all their pieces. That's my story. That's my story.
That's a good story. Yes.
So, your questions.
Oh, okay. So a little bit of a technical question first about the use of some Pali words in the sutta itself. So there's some words that are used that I'm not familiar with. Somanasi, domanasi instead of and sukha dukkha. Usually we would use the word, if it was pleasant or unpleasant, we would use the word sukha or dukkha. But in this Pali, the words are somanasi and domanasi. So domasani. So I'm curious as to why these particular words are used rather than the usual dukkha sukha.
Okay, so there are times when the Buddha makes a distinction between physical pain and physical pleasure on the one hand, and mental pain and mental pleasure on the other. And when he does make that distinction, then sukha and dukkha would apply to the physical, and domanassa would be mental pain. Somanassa would be domanassa would be mental pain. Somanassa would be mental pleasure.
Oh, okay. So soma sometimes we use in medical terms we use physical, but here it refers to the mental.
Right, because what you got is it's the soma and doma actually come from du, which means bad, and su, which means good. Okay. Then you put it in front of manasa, which has to do with the mind.
Very, very good. Okay. So Francesca or whoever is running the room, are there some other questions that people have?
Sure, we have a question from Josh here. How ought we convey the importance of putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, Satipatthana Sutta, and properly address those whose primary religion seems to be whatever views and solutions happen to be promoted in corporate government and social media in any given moment, but are also interested in meditation and Dhamma, who unfortunately continue to take the baits of the world. Dhammapada 377.
Okay, well, you're not going to be able to focus the mind on one object if you're also focusing on things outside. You might tell them, for the sake of getting the mind to settle down, you've got to learn how to put those things aside, at least temporarily, so that the mind can have some space in order to be its own mind, basically. So you're not constantly having these things running through the mind, like trucks running down the road. And then you'd have to explain, well, why is it important that the mind gets a chance to rest? If it doesn't rest, it's like the body that doesn't rest. You basically run out of strength. So even though they may be unwilling to put these things aside permanently, you say, well, at least learn how to put it aside temporarily so the mind can have a space for itself. Because after all, when the mind, when you're facing death, your social media are not going to be helping you at all. You're going to be facing issues that you have to have mastered on your own. And so you need the time and space in order to get good at those issues before the time comes when you have to use them. Anything else?
Corey, let us know if there are other questions that come about or people want to.
Yep, one just appeared. So many people are overwhelmed by the warfare in Ukraine. So it looks like two-part question here. One, when oneself is overwhelmed, what might be a skillful response? And then the second part is, when others are overwhelmed, what might be a skillful social response?
Okay, in case you're first being overwhelmed yourself, you really have to be careful about how much of this kind of information you take in, how much you expose yourself to it. I mean, the more time you spend reading those news reports, the more you're actually bringing in issues that are going to you have to wash out. And so you might tell yourself, okay, what can I do about this particular war? There's not much I can do. In that case, I've just got to learn how to put it aside and focus on the issues where I am responsible. And then secondly, when you're dealing with other people, it depends on where they're coming from in terms of their values and views. But if you can make them realize, okay, if you're taking in information about which you can do nothing, it's just cluttering up the mind to no avail. Whereas you could be focusing on areas in your life where you actually can make a difference in your own life and the lives of other people. And so this is one of those areas where you have to learn how to develop your sense of priorities and your sense of focus. So where you're going to be focusing your energy.
Please elaborate on the similarity between the equanimity of a craftsman and equanimity of a soldier.
Okay, a craftsman or craftswoman has to learn how to defeat the material. In other words, you've got to work with it to get what you want out of it. The same with the soldier has to defeat an enemy in order to get what he or she wants out of the outcome of the battle. And so there's going to be a battle. It's going to be a battle with your own laziness, a battle with the recalcitrance of some of the media that you're working with. And so your ability to practice your craft is a kind of victory. That you're overcoming enemies inside in terms of your own laziness and your own lack of skill. And also the difficulties outside. Because the materials you're working with, it's not simply a matter of they're allowing you to, they're falling into your idea of what they should be doing. sometimes they're going to be recalcitrant. And they're going to be setbacks. I mean, I learned carpentry from my father, and one of the things I learned is that you're going to be making a lot of mistakes, and you cannot let yourself be upset by the mistake. You have to figure out, okay, now that I've made the mistake, how am I going to work around it?
Josh, you have a question or a comment?
It's about the title word, maybe just as an example, um, is based on the root ayatana, and I see this translated sometimes as like um, in context of the sense spheres, sense doors, sense gates. Here it's sense media. Also, maybe I don't know if phenomena is one of them too, but all these different translation. Um, do, can you maybe share some of the process or insights on choices in words for translations?
Okay. It's, as with any translation, you're dealing with words that have one range of meanings in the original language, and then you try to put them with other words in the other language, which will have different ranges of meanings. And so sometimes if you're trying to find an equivalent that works across the board, you might find yourself coming up with an equivalent that doesn't really fit any of those really, really well, but it fits kind of. So sphere would be one of those. It gives the idea that there's the range of the senses. This word ayatana also appears in the names of the different formless states. There's the ayatana of infinite consciousness, and there's the ayatana of infinite space, which will be translated as sphere. I myself can prefer medium because these are the media through which you gain contact with the world outside. Or when I'm talking about the sense media. When I'm talking about the formless attainments, I use the word dimension because that seems to fit a lot better. Although there's also a passage where the Buddha talks about nibbana as being an ayatana. So that would be the dimension of the deathless. So those are some of the thoughts that go into it. Door, I mean, there actually is an alternative translate or an alternative term in the Pali, dwara, which actually means door or gate. And sometimes the senses are referred to as doors or gates. So it's actually translating a different term.
And then possibly a related follow-up. How confident are we in the accuracy of the root of the Pali root words? And then what is it based on? Is it based on cross-referencing of other languages? Since the spoken or has the spoken and written died out, or has there been kind of like a living thread from when it was written down? So is it kind of based like our best guesses, or how is the confidence established in the Pali root words?
Okay, there are two ways of approaching how you translate a word. One is looking at the root, trying to relate the meaning of the word to the root. But then if you try that in English, you end up with things like, how would you explain conscience? Science. Doesn't make any sense. However, if you look at the word in context, you get an idea of what conscience means. That's the way I particularly prefer to figure out meanings of words and not look at the root. And we'll look more at, well, how is this word used in a particular context in Pali language? We have the advantage now that we've got the Pali Canon on CD-ROM. So it's on a website now, so you can search the entire thing. So you can search where are the places where this particular term is used, and given the way it's used in different places, what can we gain? What can we gather about the meaning of the term that it had for the speakers of Pali? Unfortunately, native speakers of Pali are long dead and gone, so there's nobody who can go back and go ask. So it's a matter of looking, especially I like to look at the similes that the Buddha uses, because that's when he's speaking in ordinary everyday language. Like there's a term in the Satipatthana Sutta, Ekaya Namaga. which has been translated all kinds of ways. It's the only way, it's the whatever way. Whereas there's a passage where the Buddha uses the term ekayana in a simile where he's talking about a path that goes only to one destination. And that seems to be, so in other words, it's a direct path. It doesn't fork off in any other direction. So I think that gives us a little bit more confidence that that's probably what he had in mind when he was talking about it in a more abstract term, more abstract context.
It seems that, well, if like a significant degree have been mistranslated throughout the ages, then even cross-referencing them to each other could be a little more muddied. I don't know for sure. I'm just kind of grasping at straws here. But there's a website called puredhamma.net, and he talks about some of the maybe mistranslations of early European scholars of some of the Pali. He goes into great depth, and I can't pretend to follow and understand a significant portion of it. But if I don't know, I think that may be an interesting point. I guess there's not much of a question there. But thank you.
It's just that we're in a better position now, so we can see that where the earlier scholars made mistakes. Just because they didn't have, the whole Pali Canon or these other texts at their fingertips. And many times they may have been too much influenced by the commentaries. And we're now in a position, it's kind of works. Each generation is going to be correcting the previous ones. I hope.
And until the, what is it, prophesied so much that the Dhamma will eventually die out? Is that coming into play here?
That's the problem. It's the images of a drum that gets a crack, and so you put a peg in, and then it gets another crack, you put another peg in, and finally the whole drum becomes pegs, and it's not going to be able to make a sound anymore. So there is that concern that other issues will come in and kind of muddy things up.
So we have a question in the chat from Aiden. How can equanimity be exercised in all aspects of life?
Okay, again, this is a question of learning how to be selective. As you, what are the things you're going to be equanimous about? What are the things where you're going to be exercising your goodwill and compassion? And it's learning how to have a sense of time and place, so that you have priorities. But equanimity is there basically to establish priorities in the sense of what really is important that has to be done. And if you focus your attention on too many things all at once, nothing important gets done. So you have to decide, okay, there's certain things I'm going to have to let go and focus my attention on the others. And this again relates to the Buddhist statement that there are two kinds of causes of suffering: those that will go away simply when you're equanimous, and the others that will go away only when you exert an effort on them. And so there are times when you have to put your equanimity aside and really focus your efforts on getting rid of a particular type of defilement in the mind, if you want to get anywhere.
Doug, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. In the Santa Cruz Mountains, we get to witness in the spring wild turkey moms in a parade with young babes. And there's a wild turkey in the front, a mom, and two in the rear. And the mom in the front is paying close attention to what's ahead, and the two in the rear are scanning what's going on. And to me, they're exhibiting 4 of the 7 factors of awakening. They're paying attention, they're discerning what's going on, they're applying energy and persistence, and they're concentrating. Now, whether they experience serenity, rapture, and equanimity is another thing, but generally it flows along pretty well. And you're bringing up, when you brought up about equanimity, it is actually quite a dynamic that's interrelated with many other factors. And this example I bring up about wild turkeys is one that shows that the factors of awakening also work together in a mix.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just wanted to bring another species into this whole idea of our practice, and just see what you think. Thank you.
Well, I think human beings have more of a chance at equanimity than turkeys do. I mean, they live in a pretty constant fear, whereas we have a little bit more safety, a little bit more, and we're able to step back from our thoughts, step back from our fears, and look at them from a more balanced viewpoint. And this is why we're able to develop our discernment even more. So it's one of the things that makes us human as opposed to the common animals, is we can step back and develop this state of equanimity as a basis for looking at the mind from the outside. There's a passage, it's strange. There's a very minor sutta, it's a very strange sutta, which goes through a series of random lists. And one of the lists it has is, what are the two qualities that help give rise to Dharma? Which is an important issue. It's just buried in the midst of other things. And the Buddha says, basically, you have to learn how to commit yourself, and you have to learn how to reflect. Now, as you reflect, you commit yourself to the practice. You really do it seriously, not in the sense of being grim, but you give it a serious try. And then you reflect back on the results. And it's in this way that we develop skills, by doing things and then reflecting on the results. And this is one of the reasons why human beings have a wider range of skills than common animals. And so you want to learn how to take advantage of that as you're practicing the Dharma as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do share these many of these aspects with other animals, so, and it's just interesting to see how they work in harmony together, and we need them all. Thank you.
So piggybacking on that question about the turkeys, in the sutta itself, there's a question that I have about the different ways that the Tathagata trains a person. The Buddha begins by saying that the elephant trainer can train the elephant in one direction, northeast, south, and west, and the horse trainer can train the horse in one direction, and the ox trainer can train the ox to run in one direction only. But the Tathagata, he is worthy, rightly self-awakened, can train the person to fan out in 8 directions. Now the directions 4 through 8 are pretty clearly referenced to the formless jhana, but the first 3 are rather confusing in terms of what they're referring to, beginning with possessed by form. He sees the form, not perceiving the form internally, he perceives the form externally, and then most confusing that he focused only on the beautiful, and that's the 3rd direction. And I'm curious to know, put up my slide here, curious to understand what these first directions are about, whether they're related to the form jhanas, or whether they're referring to something else, or something that we're trying to avoid, or it's rather baffling to me.
Yeah. Okay. As I read that, it seems to me that he's talking about a way in which some people get their minds to settle down, as Ajahn Fuang, my teacher noted, which is that when people are meditating, they tend to be focused either primarily on the body or primarily on the visual realm. And you see that this particular way of dividing up the stages leading up to the formless realms is mentioned in passages where the Buddha is talking to Anuruddha, who was his student who was foremost in the divine eye. In other words, he saw all kinds of things, the devas and whatnot. And so when people like this are settling down to meditate, the first thing they do is that they see, they have a sense of being with their body, and they have the sense that there are forms that they're seeing, that are appearing to them while they're meditating. The second sense is basically you lose your sense of a body, but you still have the forms outside that you're seeing. And then the third is what they call the beautiful, where the forms tend to become more abstract, and deal more just kind of with pure light. And then from the light, then they go into the formless jhanas.
Okay. Makes sense, finally.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. Anything else? Relevant or irrelevant?
You've answered all my questions.
Okay.
Feel much better now.
Okay, good.
Anyone else in the group have questions? This is a good time. Francesca and Corey are checking the group to see if anyone else is raising their hand or typing in the text boxes.
Were there any of the other 5 slides or 4 slides that you had a question on, Hsien Kwan?
Oh no, those were there, and Ajahn and I had a little conversation online about the translation of the Pali word for one-pointedness. But this is something that you can find easily in his notes on the subject as well. But he can certainly, if he would like to say something about the difficulty about translating one-pointedness, the gathering together, because that one always can trick people. And he had asked me about the Chinese term for this, and there's nothing in the Chinese that says pointed. There's no pointed in there. There's just there's one mind is usually the Chinese translation. Yes, he's in, but
Because in the Pali, you have the term eka kata. Eka means one. Aga is the questionable term, and then ta at the end is what turns it into a noun. And so aga in Pali can mean either the tip of something, like the tip of your tongue, or the summit of a mountain, or the ridge pole at the top of the roof, or the tip of a blade of grass. That would be aga. That's one meaning. And so the people who would try to translate it as one-pointed would tend to that, well, the tip comes to a point. But I don't know if that's what was meant, because sometimes the ridge pole is another point. But then there's another meaning which is totally different, which is a meeting place. Like a padaga is basically, pada means meal, and a padaga is the place where the monks would gather together for their meals. Uposadaga, Uposada is what the Uposada ceremony that the monks have every 2 weeks, and the Uposadaga is the place where they gather together for that. And if you think of it, egaka, it's sort of the mind gathering into one or gathering around one topic. Things fit with the rest of the discussions of the concentration on the Pali, because all the similes and analogies that the Buddha gives for concentration are a full body awareness. The moisture that fills the ball of dough, the spring waters that fill the lake, the lotuses that are saturated with water from the roots to the tips, the man whose entire body is covered with a white cloth. The images have nothing to do with one point. They have to do with the full body awareness. So if we think of all of your awareness gathering around one topic, it makes a lot more sense. And everything fits very well. I read a book one time when someone had defined Ekakata as one-pointed. And then he went through the rest of the Pali Canon and said, well, this part of the canon is not in line with the idea that this is one-pointed, so we'll throw it out. This is not in line with this one point, we have to throw that out. He ended up throwing out most of the Pali Canon, which I didn't think was very useful.
Yes.
We do have another question from the chat box. Which sutta contains the passages on learn to commit yourself and learn to reflect on results, please?
Oof. It's in the Anguttara 10s. And gosh, I can't remember the number right off the top of my head. When I find it, I'll send the word to Don.
Thank you. Well, we have about 5 minutes left.
Yes.
Fun.
We just completed our winter, the monastics did completed their winter retreat, because here we don't have the rains, we have the snows. And
Snows.
not a lot of snows this year, just really only a couple, one significant one. But when do you practice the rains retreat at the Meta Forest?
Okay, it's from the full moon in July to the full moon in October, which this year I think is July 14th to October 10th, something like that.
Oh, very good. And the reason that I ask is that I would like to invite you back before the rains retreat for another talk, if you are willing. I won't
Okay,
put you on the spot, but we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. Yeah,
that's right.
Okay.
Well, as we continue our study, this is very, very helpful to us.
What are you studying next?
Well, we're actually doing a follow-up on this with the Niramisa Sutta, which is, of course, also has some equanimity pieces related to it.
Right.
And we've invited Bhante Amaro to come to us from England to help us out a little bit with that. And then by that time, we will be totally equanimous, and we can go to
Either that or you're sick and tired of equanimity.
you never can tell. But this is a very important topic, because we don't want to become indifferent. And
Right.
so many beginners, they think of equanimity as indifference. And of course, there are probably sections where neutrality can be interpreted as indifference. But actually, very curiously enough, I had a conversation with a mathematician friend of mine, physicist, and we were talking about 0 factorial. And it turns out that most people would define 0 factorial as 0. It would only make sense, but actually in mathematics, 0 factorial is 1. So if you're a mathematician and you study this, you have to understand how it can be that 0 factorial can be 1. Yeah. Yes, and I like that view of understanding equanimity, that equanimity is not 0. It really is a cardinal point. It's a state, and so you can't have a 0 state. It's a real state.
Well, as I said, the equanimity is not there because you don't care, but you learn how to use it because you do care about the results you're going to get.
Yes.
And I'm going to have to say, I have to be really careful about how I look at things and look at them in all fairness without getting upset by your likes or dislikes. So you can see exactly what's actually happening. And again, it's because you care, not because you don't care.
Absolutely. Yes. So we need to be able to have lots of loving kindness and caring and compassion for the world right now, but at the same time, not so much that we become dysregulated.
Right.
Yes.
I was talking with a botanist one time, and you're saying that in every plant, there's a part that's quiescent. And it stays, and then it's because there's that one little quiescent part of the plant that it can repair itself when it gets damaged. And if it loses that quiescent part, then the plant dies. So find a biologist friend and ask him about that.
I will, and that's a good point. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your visit. We really appreciate it very much, and we'll be discussing and questioning what we learned. And when we have more questions, we're going to throw them out to you.
Okay, fine.
Be great. Thank you.
Okay. Be well.
Be well.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Ajahn.
You're welcome.